Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All right, everybody. Not back. Gonna be back. Do want to switch gears. And so it's interesting, right? Every once in a while on the Aaron Torres pod, YouTube, whatever, we will do something. I'll get a great question, whether it's the podcast, whether it's via email, Instagram, whatever. And sometimes I throw it on the podcast. Sometimes we do a mailbag portion of the Aaron Torres pod. And then sometimes I just do a quick reaction on YouTube and post it up here. I'm going to do that today because I got a great question kind of on the future of expansion and realignment. And I know we're all kind of tired of talking about it, but I thought this was a very interesting angle that I don't think has really been discussed enough. By now, we know where we are at this exact moment. Pac-12 falls apart. Couple teams are out of the Big Ten. Couple teams are added to the Big 12. Couple teams are left behind. And so now the next kind of real question is, what is the future of the ACC? We know Florida State is trying to get out. Will they be able to get out? If they somehow get out, does that mean that the league falls apart? And then what happens from there? And so over the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of talks, not just on this show, but all over the sports media space about kind of who would be top priority in the ACC. And I've said, and others have said, that while Florida State and Clemson are the biggest football brands, that it's actually North Carolina, UNC, and to a smaller degree, Virginia, that would be top priority for both the Big Ten and the SEC. And so I bring it up because over the last couple of days, I got a great question on YouTube from a listener named SMC983. SMC983 chimes in. He says, can someone explain to me why the SEC would want UNC so bad? I thought this was all about football. So it's a great question from SMC. And I think it's a fair question, right? All we talk about is football. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. And so you would think Clemson would be a top priority. Florida State would be a top priority. And I'm not saying they wouldn't be for the SEC, the Big Ten, or both. But I truly believe that if there was basically, if the ACC falls apart, if Florida State gets out and everybody else can get out with them, there's a jailbreak in the ACC. I do think North Carolina would probably be the number one priority for the SEC and Big Ten as well. So the question becomes why? And I really do think it's for a few reasons. First off, when we talk expansion, SEC expansion, that's an important word. It's not SEC addition. It's not SEC realignment. And one thing Greg Sankey has talked about very publicly is like, look, we're not really in the market to expand, but there's a couple things that he's looking for. And one, I do think it is reaching beyond the current footprint. And so the footprint currently northernmost on the seaboard is, of course, South Carolina, where the University of South Carolina is. And so when you look at, say, Clemson and Florida State, the SEC is already in the state of Florida, in the state of South Carolina. Those schools wouldn't be happy. Not that it really matters, ask Texas A&M. But going to North Carolina allows you to get into a new market. And I think most importantly, allows you to get into a new market with the flagship university of that state. This isn't expanding for the sake of expanding. It's not adding Wake Forest or North Carolina Central, no disrespect to those schools, or UNC Wilmington, just to say you have a team in North Carolina. It's a big school with a big brand, a state school, state funds. That stuff matters. I remember early in the realignment process, when it became sort of clear that Colorado was looking for a life raft to the Big 12, I said to somebody kind of pretty high up, I said, okay, so I get why Colorado would want to leave for the Big 12, but why would the Big 12 want Colorado? And they said bluntly, they're like, it's a university of, meaning it's technically Colorado University, CU, but it's a university of the state. Again, state funding, public school, good money, like there's a lot of resources that can go into that school that sometimes a private school or a smaller school or a regional school or whatever, you can't get access to. Beyond that, let's say this for North Carolina, great academic school. Certainly why the Big Ten is interested. And I think the SEC looks at it and says, if we can get a very good sports brand that is also a great academic school, that's going to increase our profile, that's going to impress, the powers that be, that's going to keep the school presidents happy, that stuff matters. Remember, the school presidents are the ones that sign off on this stuff. And so I bring it up because I do think the school presidents would love to add a school the prestige of North Carolina. To a smaller degree, I think it's the same with the University of Virginia. State that the SEC isn't currently in, contiguous, borders another part of the borders another school in the region. I'm tripping over my own words here. Great academic university as well that raises the academic profile of the SEC. I'm not saying that matters to everybody, but I do think that matters to the powers that be, which is kind of crazy because it's so far removed from anything academically warranted anyway, right? Like, obviously, if it was all about academics, Stanford and Cal would have a home. But I do think if you can add a good school with a good brand, good academics, nobody's turning that down. Speaking of which, I do think that last part is important as well. It's not just about academics, and it's not just about adding for the sake of adding. North Carolina is a big brand that is good at a lot of different things. North Carolina, obviously, in 2022, played for a basketball national championship. You probably heard about that. They lost to Kansas in the title game. But they also have a pretty good track record of winning championships across all sports. First of all, this century alone, 3 national championships in men's basketball. You know about that. But how about this? Just in the last decade, they have a men's lacrosse championship. They have 4 field hockey championships. They have 2 women's lacrosse championships. Now, I get those aren't even necessarily sports that the SEC sponsors. But again, if you're going to add schools, it can't just be about academics. Again, as we learned from Stanford and Cal, you got to be able to compete too. And North Carolina can compete at a really high level in a lot of sports. Again, well-funded, all that good stuff. You don't have to worry about North Carolina not spending the money if they get SEC money. Big brand, good academics, good athletic department. And I do think even though football hasn't been great, one, it's had its moments. Keep in mind, it was just literally 2 years ago that they played in the Orange Bowl against Texas A&M during that 2020 COVID season. And I would think also, I don't know this for sure, I do think that there's probably an element of North Carolina, especially in football, being a sleeping giant as far as the potential of its football program. Goes without saying, I think everybody kind of knows really good high school football in the state of North Carolina. They've produced all sorts of really good players over the last decade or so. And what I would also say is it is a great growing population as well in sports. And not just in sports, but just in general. Looked it up before I started this segment. 3rd highest population increase since the start of COVID. Over 100,000 people moved to that state alone in the 2021-2022 kind of school year-ish type thing. So growing population, great high school sports, great funding, great academics, an improving football program. I don't know if it's going to work under Mac Brown, but he certainly laid out the blueprint. So I hope that makes sense. And yes, I do believe, I don't think it's a made-up thing. I think if the ACC ever falls apart, I do think North Carolina is a priority. They're saying all the right things right now. Their AD came out and basically explained that they're not looking to go anywhere else. I think everybody in the ACC is kind of just mad at Florida State right now. Like, dude, chill out. Like calm the F down. But I bring it up to say, if North Carolina, if the ACC falls apart, I do think North Carolina would be a top priority for all of those reasons that I just mentioned.